The morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life turned into an unimaginable nightmare. I still remember standing in that hotel room, fumbling with my tie for what felt like the 100th time, my hands trembling not from excitement but from sheer nervous energy. Outside, the vineyard we'd chosen for our wedding sprawled across rolling hills, its beauty almost mocking me now. It had been Alex's dream location, a place where she said we could start our forever together. But before I even stepped foot into the ceremony, my entire world came crashing down. My phone buzzed on the dresser, shattering the fragile calm I'd been clinging to. When I saw Alex's name flash across the screen, my heart leapt not out of joy, but out of dread. Something about the timing felt wrong, and then I answered. Her voice was cold, clinical, devoid of any warmth or regret. "I can't marry you," she said flatly, her words slicing through me like a knife. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Was this some kind of sick joke? A last-minute panic attack? But no, it got worse. She didn't stop there. With the same detached tone, she dropped the bombshell. She'd fallen in love with someone else. Not just anyone, my own brother Nathan. She told me they'd been seeing each other behind my back for months, indulging in a secret affair neither of them could resist. Every word she spoke hit me like a punch to the gut. There were no apologies, no explanations beyond her vague claim that she had to follow her heart, as if that somehow justified destroying everything we'd built over 5 years. But the betrayal didn't end with Alex. When I arrived at the venue later that morning, still reeling from her call, I discovered the full extent of the deception. My parents, the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, had known about Alex and Nathan's relationship all along. In fact, they hadn't just known, they'd actively encouraged it. They believed Alex deserved better than me, that Nathan, their golden child, could give her the life I never could. To them, I wasn't good enough, not successful enough, not wealthy enough, not perfect enough. The hours that followed were a blur of canceled vendors, confused guests, and pitying stares. While everyone scrambled to deal with the fallout, I sat alone in a back room, still wearing my wedding suit, trying to process how my entire life had unraveled in a matter of minutes. My best man tried to handle the practical details, but nothing could ease the pain of knowing that my fiancé, my brother, and even my own parents had conspired against me. Their actions weren't just a rejection of me as a partner, they were a dismissal of my worth as a person. Looking back, I realize now that the signs had always been there. Alex's subtle manipulations, my parents' relentless comparisons between me and Nathan, the way Alex lit up whenever Nathan talked about his business ventures during family gatherings, it all made sense now. But at the time, I was too blinded by love and hope to see the truth. That day wasn't just the end of my engagement. It was the beginning of a long, painful journey toward understanding the toxic dynamics that had shaped my life for as long as I could remember. The betrayal that unfolded on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life left me shattered in ways I never thought possible. Losing Alex was devastating enough, but discovering that my own family, my parents, who were supposed to love and protect me, had actively conspired against me felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already gaping wound. It wasn't just the loss of a fiancé, it was the collapse of everything I had believed in. My home, my future, my sense of belonging, all of it evaporated within hours. In the days that followed, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I severed all ties with my family and walked away from everything I knew. Leaving wasn't easy, it was excruciating. The house I had purchased with every penny of my savings became a constant reminder of the dreams I'd built with Alex, dreams that now seemed like cruel illusions. Desperate for closure, I sold it at a fraction of its value, too blinded by grief to negotiate or wait for a better offer. At first, I convinced myself that selling the house was liberating, a symbolic gesture of starting over. But reality hit hard when I realized how little I could afford in Denver, the city where I hoped to rebuild my life. What little money I had barely covered the deposit on a dingy studio apartment in one of the less desirable neighborhoods. The walls were paper thin, the plumbing groaned ominously whenever I turned on the faucet, and the faint smell of mildew clung to everything. For someone who had once envisioned a cozy suburban home filled with laughter and love, this new reality was suffocating. The isolation only deepened as the weeks went by. Moving to a completely unfamiliar state meant leaving behind not just my family, but also the few friends I had managed to keep after the wedding fiasco. Most of them had awkwardly distanced themselves during those chaotic months following the betrayal, unsure of how to navigate the wreckage of my life. Now, surrounded by strangers in a city that felt cold and indifferent, I sank further into despair. Each night, I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the events of that day over and over again. How could Alex do this? Why hadn't my parents stood by me? And most painfully, why hadn't I seen any of it coming? Depression crept in slowly at first, like shadows lengthening at dusk, until it consumed me entirely. Simple tasks, getting out of bed, showering, eating, felt insurmountable. I stopped answering calls from work colleagues, ignored emails, and avoided human interaction altogether. There were moments when the weight of loneliness became unbearable, and dark thoughts began to take root. One particularly bleak evening, sitting alone in that cramped, dimly lit apartment, I found myself contemplating whether life was even worth continuing. The pain of losing Alex, the rejection from my family, and the overwhelming sense of failure converged into a storm of hopelessness. If it hadn't been for a concerned neighbor knocking on my door to check on me, I might have acted on those impulses. That moment marked a turning point. The neighbor, sensing something was wrong, insisted I see a doctor. Reluctantly, I agreed, and it was there that I met Dr. Emily Carter, a therapist whose calm demeanor and unwavering patience saved me from spiraling further into darkness. During our early sessions, she helped me unpack years of suppressed emotions, the toxic dynamics of my family, the red flags I had ignored in Alex, and the crushing pressure of living under Nathan's shadow. She taught me that healing wouldn't happen overnight, but it was possible if I committed to the process. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece myself back together. But rebuilding wasn't without its challenges. Financial instability loomed large. I had burned through much of my savings during the move and struggled to make ends meet. I took up odd jobs while searching for permanent employment, often working late shifts at coffee shops or delivering groceries just to cover rent. The contrast between my previous life as a senior software developer and my current circumstances was stark, a daily reminder of how far I had fallen. Yet, amidst the struggle, small victories began to emerge. I joined a local hiking group, where I met people who accepted me for who I was without judgment. They didn't know about my past, and for the first time in years, I felt free from the burden of expectation. Through therapy and self-reflection, I came to understand that cutting ties with my family wasn't just about escaping their toxicity, it was about reclaiming my identity. For so long, I had defined myself based on their standards, striving to measure up to Nathan's unattainable success. Now, living in Denver, I learned to focus on my own goals, my own happiness. I poured my energy into work, eventually landing a stable job at another tech company. Though modest compared to my brother's empire, it gave me a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, I wasn't competing with anyone, I was simply doing my best, and that was enough. Looking back, those early days in Denver were some of the hardest of my life, but they were also transformative. The pain of losing Alex and my family forced me to confront truths I had long avoided. It pushed me to seek help, to prioritize my mental health, and to build a life on my own terms. While the scars of betrayal still lingered, they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as reminders of how far I had come and how determined I was to never let anyone else dictate my worth again. 2 years had passed since the day my life unraveled in front of me like a threadbare rug, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. I had finally begun rebuilding, finding solace in my new home in Denver, forging friendships with people who didn't know my past, and focusing on my mental health through therapy and self-reflection. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was content. But that fragile peace shattered one cold evening when Alex appeared at my doorstep, trembling under the weight of her own despair. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished, confident marketing executive I once knew, the woman whose sharp wit and dazzling smile could light up any room. In her place stood someone hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. Her once flawless makeup couldn't mask the dark circles beneath her eyes, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple sweater and trousers that hung loosely on her gaunt frame. She looked as though she hadn't slept properly in weeks, and every movement seemed deliberate, as if even breathing required too much effort. When I let her inside, she collapsed onto my couch, shaking not from the chill of the Denver night, but from something far deeper. As we sat there in the living room where I'd spent countless hours piecing my life back together, Alex poured out her story, her voice cracking with emotion. What she described was not just a marriage gone wrong, it was a nightmare meticulously crafted by Nathan, the man I had always suspected was hiding something sinister beneath his charming facade. According to Alex, their relationship had started off deceptively idyllic. Nathan lavished her with expensive gifts, funded her dream of starting her own marketing consultancy, and bought them a sprawling estate in Boston's most prestigious neighborhood. To outsiders, they were the perfect power couple, living a fairy tale life. But behind closed doors, the illusion crumbled into a prison of control and manipulation. Alex recounted how Nathan began tightening his grip on every aspect of her existence. At first, it was subtle, offering helpful suggestions about her business decisions or insisting she avoid certain clients he deemed untrustworthy. Then came the demands: no more late nights at work, no socializing without his approval, and constant updates on her whereabouts. Eventually, he installed himself as chairman of her company's board, giving him final say over every contract and decision. The gaslighting followed soon after. He would move items around the house and accuse her of losing them, contradict statements he'd made mere hours earlier, and tell mutual acquaintances she was losing her mind whenever she dared question him. But the worst part of her story wasn't about her, it was about their son. Their little boy, barely 18 months old, was already being subjected to Nathan's tyrannical rules. Everything from the colors of his toys to the times he was allowed to sleep was dictated with military precision. If the baby cried during one of Nathan's crucial conference calls, he would fly into a rage, screaming at Alex for being an incompetent mother. Alex broke down in tears as she described how terrified her son had become, flinching at sudden noises and clinging to her in silence. It was clear that Nathan wasn't just controlling Alex, he was shaping their child into a miniature version of himself, instilling fear and obedience from infancy. Alex pleaded with me, her voice raw with desperation. "If you don't help me," she whispered, "I'll lose everything. He's already said he'll ruin me if I try to leave. He'll take our son away, bankrupt me with legal fees, and make sure I never work in this industry again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about saving herself, it was about protecting their child from growing up in the same toxic environment I had endured with Nathan as my brother. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 years ago, Alex had walked away from me without a second thought, choosing Nathan over me while my family cheered her on. Now, here she was, begging for my help against the very man she'd chosen. Part of me wanted to turn her away to let her face the consequences of her choices, but another part of me couldn't ignore the image of that frightened little boy, trapped in a world dictated by Nathan's cruelty. Alex wasn't the same person she'd been 2 years ago, and neither was I. As much as I hated to admit it, her pain felt eerily familiar. By the time she left my apartment that night, I was consumed by conflicting emotions. Helping Alex meant reopening wounds I had worked so hard to heal. It meant confronting Nathan, enduring the wrath of my parents, and risking everything I had built in Denver. Yet, doing nothing meant condemning an innocent child to a lifetime of fear and manipulation. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew I couldn't make this decision lightly. Whatever choice I made, it would define not only my future but also the lives of Alex and her son. The moment Alex walked out of my apartment after her desperate plea for help, I thought I had made it clear where I stood. I couldn't and wouldn't be dragged back into the toxic web of my family's dysfunction. But what followed was a relentless onslaught that felt like being caught in a storm, with no shelter in sight. My decision to distance myself from their manipulative dynamics over the past 2 years seemed to mean nothing now. To them, I wasn't just an outsider. I was suddenly the enemy, a traitor who dared defy the carefully constructed facade they had spent decades maintaining. It started almost immediately. By the next morning, My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, texts, emails, missed calls, all bearing the same message, delivered in varying tones of accusation and manipulation. Friends I hadn't spoken to since the wedding fiasco resurfaced, accusing me of cowardice and selfishness. "How can you turn your back on your own blood?" one text read. Another called me heartless for refusing to save Alex and her son from Nathan's wrath. The most cutting message came from Alex's former maid of honor, who wrote, "You're proving everyone right. You're too weak to step up when it matters." The hypocrisy was staggering. Where were these people 2 years ago when I was the one reeling from betrayal? When my parents and brother orchestrated the destruction of my life, not a single soul stepped forward to defend me. Now, they expected me to risk everything I had painstakingly rebuilt to clean up their mess. But the real assault came from within my immediate family. Nathan, ever the calculating businessman, struck first. His email landed in my inbox like a grenade, its brevity masking its venomous intent. "I hear our ex-fiancée came to you in tears," he began, his words dripping with condescension. "If you know what's best for you, stay out of family affairs. It's been 2 years since you were involved. Don't start now." The implicit threat hung heavy in the air. If I interfered, he would make sure my career and reputation were obliterated. As if to drive the point home, he added, "Don't think Denver is far enough to keep you safe." Reading those lines sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. My mother, Catherine, took a different but equally insidious approach. Her call came later that afternoon, and even though I knew better than to answer, something compelled me to pick up. From the moment she said hello, her voice oozed false sweetness, the kind she used to manipulate me as a child. "Sweetheart," she cooed, skipping any pretense of small talk, "I know Alex came to see you. You must understand, she's going through a tough time, but that doesn't mean she's thinking clearly. Nathan is doing everything he can to be a good father and husband." When I didn't respond, she shifted tactics. "Your brother's company is at a critical juncture. Everything he's built could crumble because of this divorce nonsense. Doesn't he deserve better from his own brother?" Her words hit like a sledgehammer, not because they held any truth, but because they revealed the depth of her loyalty to Nathan, not to me. She spoke as if my worth was tied solely to how much I could contribute to propping up her golden child. And then came the guilt trip, her ultimate weapon. "We've always done what's best for both of our boys," she insisted, her tone sharpening. "Families stick together, even when parents make mistakes. Right now, Nathan needs you to be the bigger person." Every syllable was calculated to twist my emotions, to make me doubt my resolve. But instead of crumbling under the weight of her manipulation, I found myself growing angrier not at her, but at the system she represented. For decades, my family had operated like a machine, each cog turning in perfect harmony to protect Nathan's image and maintain their illusion of perfection. And now, they expected me to play my part again. The pressure mounted as more messages poured in, each one more suffocating than the last. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives I barely remember joined the chorus, bombarding me with demands to do the right thing. One cousin wrote, "Neither of your parents is getting any younger. Do you really want them worrying about raising their grandchild in a broken home for the rest of their lives?" Another chimed in with passive-aggressive platitudes, "True men don't hold grudges. Be the bigger person." But the most infuriating message came from my father's sister, who accused me of enabling Alex's ungrateful behavior. According to her, Nathan had given Alex everything she wanted, and I was undermining his efforts by refusing to support him. What struck me most wasn't the volume of their attacks, it was the sheer audacity of their hypocrisy. None of them refuted Alex's claims about Nathan's controlling behavior or my parents' enabling actions. Instead, they focused solely on silencing me, on ensuring I didn't disrupt the narrative they had crafted. Their desperation only confirmed what I already knew: my family wasn't interested in justice or fairness, they were protecting their empire, no matter the cost. As the days passed, the weight of their campaign pressed down on me, testing the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Yet, amidst the chaos, a realization dawned: their reaction wasn't about me, it was about control. They weren't angry because I had hurt them. They were furious because I had refused to play my assigned role in their drama. For the first time, I saw their manipulation for what it truly was, a fragile construct that crumbled when challenged. And while the road ahead promised danger, I knew one thing for certain: I would never let them pull me back into their toxic orbit. After days of sleepless nights and relentless internal conflict, I finally made the decision that would alter the course of not only my life but potentially the lives of others as well. It wasn't a choice I arrived at lightly. It was born out of hours spent in deep conversation with my therapist, who helped me navigate the labyrinth of guilt, fear, and responsibility weighing on my shoulders. The question wasn't whether Alex or my nephew deserved help, they clearly did, but whether I could intervene without sacrificing the fragile peace I had painstakingly built over the past 2 years. In the end, I decided to file an anonymous report with Child Protective Services (CPS). It was the only way I could think of to protect my nephew while maintaining the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. The process of gathering evidence was grueling, both emotionally and mentally. For 3 days, I pored over every text message, email, and voicemail I had received from Nathan, Alex, and our family members since this nightmare began. Each piece of communication felt like reopening old wounds, forcing me to relive moments I wanted desperately to forget. Nathan's menacing emails stood out the most. His thinly veiled threats were chilling reminders of the power he wielded and the lengths he would go to maintain control. I included screenshots of these messages, along with detailed accounts Alex had shared about Nathan's controlling behavior toward their son. Every word she spoke painted a picture of a household ruled by fear, where even a toddler's cries could spark explosive rage. But the most damning evidence came from Nathan's former coworker, who reached out after hearing whispers of my involvement. He provided documents suggesting financial irregularities within Nathan's company, falsified records, covert threats to employees, and settlements paid to silence those who dared speak up. Though these allegations didn't directly relate to my nephew's situation, they offered a broader view of Nathan's manipulative tendencies and the toxic environment he fostered wherever he went. Compiling all of this information into a coherent report felt like assembling a puzzle where every piece revealed another layer of corruption. By the time I hit submit, my hands were trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of knowing I had crossed the line there was no turning back from. Almost immediately, the fallout began. Less than 72 hours after submitting the report, my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Nathan's name flashed across my screen multiple times, each message more unhinged than the last. "You think you can hide behind anonymity?" One read. "I know it was you. You've just signed your own death warrant." His words dripped with venom, promising retribution in ways that sent shivers down my spine. He vowed to destroy my career, to make sure I was blacklisted in the tech industry, and ominously warned, "Watch your back, you're dead to this family." The sheer audacity of his threats left me shaken, but what unnerved me most was how calculated they were. This wasn't just anger, it was a declaration of war. If Nathan's messages were meant to intimidate me, the call from my father's lawyer was designed to crush me entirely. His voice was cold and clinical, devoid of any familial warmth. "Your father has instructed me to inform you that unless you retract this report immediately, you will be removed from his will," he stated matter-of-factly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a man threatening to disinherit someone who had already walked away from the family fortune. But the underlying message was clear: compliance was non-negotiable. My refusal to play their game wasn't just inconvenient, it was a direct challenge to the system they had spent decades protecting. Despite the storm brewing around me, I found a strange sense of clarity amidst the chaos. Every threat, every attempt to manipulate me into reversing my decision only reinforced that I had done the right thing. My family's outrage wasn't rooted in concern for Alex or my nephew, it was about preserving their carefully constructed facade. They weren't denying the accusations because they couldn't. Instead, they attacked me for daring to expose the truth. And yet, for the first time in my life, their words didn't cut as deeply as they once had. Therapy had taught me to recognize their tactics for what they were: desperate attempts to regain control. What surprised me most, however, was the unexpected support I began receiving. A few cousins, who had previously remained silent, privately praised me for standing up to the family. Two of Nathan's former employees contacted me, eager to provide statements corroborating Alex's claims. Even some old friends, who had initially condemned my decision, started reaching out to express regret for doubting me. These small acts of solidarity reminded me that change is possible even in the face of overwhelming adversity. As I sat alone in my apartment that night, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop, I realized something profound. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean being the loudest or the most dramatic. It means finding a way to help without losing yourself in the process. Yes, there would likely be consequences. Nathan might try to sabotage my career, and my family might follow through on their threats. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't making decisions based on fear. I had chosen to act morally, to protect an innocent child, and to uphold the boundaries I had fought so hard to create. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done everything in my power to ensure my nephew wouldn't grow up in the same shadow I had. The fallout from my anonymous report to Child Protective Services (CPS) was swift and brutal, a tidal wave of anger and manipulation that seemed intent on drowning me. My family, who had always prided themselves on their polished public image, wasted no time in launching a full-scale campaign to discredit me. Within days, social media became a battleground, with cryptic posts and thinly veiled accusations painting me as the villain of the story of bitter ex-fiancé consumed by jealousy and revenge. Some people just can't let go, one post read, accompanied by hashtags like #FamilyFirst and #ForgivenessOverHatred. Another post accused me of sabotaging Alex's marriage out of spite, claiming I was trying to tear apart a happy home for my own selfish gain. The hypocrisy was staggering. They were accusing me of betrayal while ignoring the years of deceit and manipulation they had perpetuated. Even distant relatives and acquaintances joined the chorus, flooding my inbox with messages accusing me of being ungrateful, disloyal, and destructive. Friends I hadn't spoken to since the wedding debacle resurfaced, expressing disappointment that I would stoop so low as to involve authorities in family matters. One particularly venomous message came from an uncle I barely remembered. "You've shamed this family. Nathan has done nothing but provide for Alex and their son, and you're throwing it all away because you can't handle rejection." Their words stung, not because they held any truth, but because they revealed how deeply ingrained their loyalty to Nathan and their denial of his behavior truly was. It wasn't about protecting Alex or my nephew. It was about preserving the illusion of perfection at any cost. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected began to emerge, cracks in the carefully constructed facade my family had maintained for decades. A few cousins, who had previously remained silent, reached out privately to express their support. One cousin admitted she had always suspected Nathan's controlling tendencies, but never dared speak up for fear of retaliation. "I'm proud of you for standing up to them," she wrote. This family needed someone to break the cycle. Even more surprising were the calls I received from former employees of Nathan's company. They shared harrowing stories of his explosive temper, covert threats, and financial misconduct, details that mirrored the accounts Alex had given me. One man recounted how Nathan had forced him out of the company after he questioned irregularities in the accounting department. "We've been waiting for someone to expose him," he said. "If you need witnesses, count me in." As the days turned into weeks, CPS began their investigation, and the tide slowly started to shift. With mounting evidence against Nathan, including testimony from Alex, documentation of his manipulative behavior, and statements from his former employees, the agency granted Alex temporary custody of their son. For the first time in months, she sounded hopeful when we spoke. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice trembling with gratitude. Those two words carried more weight than anything else I'd heard throughout this ordeal. Knowing that my actions had opened a path towards safety and stability for her and my nephew filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Of course, the victory wasn't without its costs. The backlash from my family intensified, with Catherine leading the charge. She left voicemails laced with venom, accusing me of ruining Nathan's life and tarnishing the family name. "How could you do this to your own blood?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. But for the first time, her words didn't cut as deeply as they once had. Therapy had taught me to recognize her tactics for what they were: desperate attempts to regain control over a situation spiraling beyond her grasp. Nathan, too, continued his tirade of threats, vowing to make me pay for crossing him. Yet, even as I bolstered my personal security measures and alerted my employer to potential harassment, I found solace in knowing I had acted morally. What struck me most was how the investigation exposed Nathan's true nature, not just to me, but to the world. As CPS dug deeper, whispers of his misconduct spread beyond our immediate circle, reaching colleagues, business partners, and even members of his exclusive country club. For the first time, the golden boy was facing consequences for his actions, and it was clear that my family's carefully curated image was beginning to crumble under the weight of the truth. While the road ahead promised challenges, potential legal battles, strained relationships, and lingering animosity, I knew I had made the right decision. By choosing to act through legitimate channels rather than succumbing to their toxic dynamics, I had broken a cycle that had haunted me for decades. In the end, the experience reinforced a lesson I had spent years learning: doing the right thing doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for others. Protecting my nephew didn't require me to re-engage with my family's dysfunction or compromise my mental health. Instead, it meant finding a middle ground, a way to help without losing myself in the process. And as I looked toward the future, I realized that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest growth. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has transpired over the past 2 years and especially these last few weeks, I find myself grappling with a strange mix of emotions. Fear, relief, and certainty, and even a flicker of hope swirl within me like storm clouds parting to reveal glimpses of sunlight. The weight of my family's betrayal still lingers, as does the sting of Nathan's threats and the suffocating pressure they've tried to impose on me once again. Yet, for the first time in what feels like forever, I feel a sense of clarity, a quiet confidence that I've done the right thing, not just for myself but for an innocent child caught in the crossfire of their toxic dynamics. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come since that fateful morning when my world collapsed beneath me. Losing Alex on our wedding day wasn't just a personal failure. It was a cataclysmic event that shattered every illusion I had about love, loyalty, and family. For months afterward, I existed in a fog of despair, questioning whether I would ever recover from the humiliation and heartbreak. But now, through the lens of hindsight, I see that moment not as the end of my life but as the beginning of my liberation. That devastating betrayal forced me to confront truths I had long ignored: the toxicity of my family's favoritism, the red flags I had dismissed in Alex, and the crushing expectations I had internalized under Nathan's shadow. It was painful, yes, but it was also necessary. Without hitting rock bottom, I might never have found the strength to walk away and start over. The decision to file that anonymous report to Child Protective Services was one of the hardest choices I've ever made. Every fiber of my being screamed against reopening old wounds or risking everything I had rebuilt in Denver. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stand idly by while another life, my nephew's life, was shaped by the same destructive forces that had nearly broken me. Therapy taught me that helping others doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being. By finding a way to act morally without re-engaging directly with my family's dysfunction, I proved to myself that boundaries can coexist with compassion. And though Nathan's rage-filled messages and my mother's guilt trips continue to haunt my inbox, I no longer feel the same paralyzing fear they once inspired. Their words are hollow now, mere echoes of a system desperate to maintain control at any cost. What strikes me most is how this ordeal has revealed the true nature of those around me. While some friends and distant relatives turned their backs, labeling me selfish or cowardly, others emerged as unexpected allies. Former employees of Nathan's company reached out, eager to share their own stories of his manipulative behavior. Cousins who had remained silent for years privately praised me for standing up to the family machine. Even strangers online offered words of encouragement, reminding me that doing the right thing often comes at a price, but that price is worth paying if it means protecting the vulnerable. These small acts of solidarity have reinforced something I've spent years learning: you don't need everyone's approval to know you're on the right path. Of course, the road ahead remains uncertain. Nathan may try to retaliate professionally, leveraging his connections to sabotage my career. My parents could follow through on their threat to disinherit me, not that I care about their money anymore. And CPS investigations are unpredictable, with outcomes that could shift in either direction. But despite these looming challenges, I feel lighter than I have in years. For so long, I allowed my worth to be dictated by my family's impossible standards and society's narrow definitions of success. Now, I define myself not by what I've lost but by what I've gained: resilience, self-awareness, and the courage to live authentically. In many ways, losing Alex 2 years ago felt like the lowest point of my life, a betrayal so profound it left me questioning whether I deserved happiness. But now, I realize it was the wake-up call I needed to break free from a system designed to diminish me. Sometimes, the greatest tragedies become the catalysts for transformation. They force us to rebuild ourselves from the ground up, stripping away the illusions and insecurities until all that remains is the truth of who we are. If nothing else, this experience has taught me that healing isn't linear. It's messy, imperfect, and often painful. But it's also possible, and sometimes, the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. To anyone reading this who finds themselves trapped in similar circumstances, know this: you don't have to stay in systems that harm you. You don't have to sacrifice your mental health to prove your worth. There is always a middle ground, a way to help others without losing yourself in the process. Your lowest point doesn't have to define you. Instead, it can become the foundation upon which you build a better, more authentic life. As I close this chapter of my story, I do so with gratitude for the lessons learned, the strength gained, and the hope that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to grow. Whatever happens next, I know I've already won simply by choosing to live on my own terms.